A 600-page document, the Irish backstop gone. We have a deal in Brussels, or do we? Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. Welcome to a special edition of the France 24 debate. We're at the European Council in Brussels, where we've just heard the big leaders speak. Jean-Claude Juncker, Donald Tusk, Michel Barnier, Leo Varadkar, and Boris Johnson. Throughout the next hour, we're going to be talking more about that and seeing how we get from Thursday, when the announcement of this agreement was struck after 2 weeks of intense talks here in Brussels, to next Saturday in London, where Boris Johnson, on paper, does not have the votes to get this agreement through the House of Commons. First, let's look at what has happened already this day. Yeneli has more.
Breakthrough in Brussels. A new Brexit deal negotiated between the EU and Boris Johnson's government is on the table.
This is a fair, a balanced agreement. It is testament to our commitment to finding solutions. It provides certainty where Brexit creates uncertainty. It protects the rights of our citizens, and it protects peace and stability on the island of Ireland.
The withdrawal agreement now has to be approved by both European and British parliaments. If the past is any indication, it'll be harder to get a majority in London than on the continent.
I hope very much now, speaking of elected representatives, that my fellow MPs in Westminster do now come together to get Brexit done, to get this excellent deal over the line and to deliver Brexit.
UK opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn says his party will vote against the accord.
From what we've read of this deal, it doesn't meet our demands or our expectations. It creates a border down the Irish Sea between Britain and Northern Ireland, and it leads once again to a race to the bottom in rights and protections for British citizens.
Johnson's own Northern Irish allies, the DUP, say they're not convinced either.
As things stand, we could not support what is being suggested on customs and consent issues, and there is a lack of clarity on VAT.
Boris Johnson plans on taking the divorce bill to Westminster on Saturday, where the House of Commons is set to convene for a special session on the future of Brexit.
And at the European Parliament, at the European Council, we're joined by an old hand, a veteran when it comes to EU summits, columnist Paul Taylor of Politico. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
You've covered some big ones since what, 1982?
1982, I'm afraid to say.
How would you rank this one?
Oh, it's certainly a dramatic moment. You can tell by the number of television lights down there in the atrium of the press centre. It's one of those historic moments, but we're not quite sure how historic it is, and we won't know until we get the vote on Saturday. My personal hunch is that he's going to somehow squeeze it through, but but I can't really tell you how. I think, people in Britain clearly are fed up with this. They want to get it over. Yes, there's still a bitter Remainer movement that feels that they were cheated and that would like to have a second referendum. They're not, I don't think, going to get that. They're not united enough. They're not strong enough in Parliament. And people are also aware that this time it really does seem to be this deal or no deal and going over a cliff.
This deal or no deal or going over a cliff? If it was as simple as approve the deal or don't approve the deal on Saturday. But wait, there's more, because there are amendments to say, yes, some say we'll approve the deal, but then you have to put it up for a referendum.
Well, people will try to do that. Previous attempts to get a referendum passed by Parliament in one way or another have not succeeded. So the votes have never been there. In fact, this House of Commons has been able to vote several times on what it doesn't want, but hasn't yet been able to vote on what it does want, other than to say it doesn't want no deal and it does want an extension rather than no deal.
Boris Johnson earlier saying this agreement means the UK leaves whole and entire, those are his words, on October the 31st.
Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? I mean, yes and no. Of course, it means that Britain is heading for a more distant relationship with the European Union than the one that Theresa May had been negotiating, because it won't stay in the customs union, it won't stay in the single market. At the same time, there will be a special status for Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland will be sort of on both sides of the looking glass, as it were. There will de facto, in fact, be a customs border down the Irish Sea. That's what the Northern Irish don't like, or at least the DUP don't like.
That's a big concession.
But Northern Irish business like that a lot, because it enables them to keep the all-Ireland economy going, on which they depend. And I think the DUP, quite apart from any blandishments that Mr. Johnson may be able to give them in the next few 24 hours, they will certainly be hearing from the Northern Irish business community saying, come on now, let's get on with this. We need to go out and do business and not be caught in limbo, in no man's land.
Paul Taylor, France 24 viewers watching, they're hearing the UK side call it an EU customs territory for Northern Ireland. They're hearing the EU side call it a customs union. It sounds like a semantic game, or lipstick on a pig.
Well, some of the best pigs wear lipstick, I'm told. Look, inevitably, this is the fudge to end all fudges. It has to be, because it's so difficult to reconcile all these sides' positions. The reality is there's not going to be a hard border on the island of Ireland. The people of Northern Ireland, through their elected assembly, will get to vote in 4 years' time whether they want to keep these arrangements. If they reject them, then there will be a 2-year transition where we'll have to work out different arrangements. They also have the option
wait,
of
hang
keeping
on
them
a
going for
second.
longer.
Hang on a second.
Yeah.
So the Irish backstop is gone.
Yes.
But the earliest that you'd have a land border back and you'd have, the hardcore, if you will, scenario
would be 2026.
Yes.
That's to say, if the
backstop was just 1 year. Now we're going all the way to 2026.
First of all, the transition itself could be extended.
For hard Brexiters?
Well, the question is, what are they Brexiting to? Does anybody believe that there are lots of free trade deals just waiting to be signed with countries that would somehow make this no longer worthwhile? It takes years and years and years to negotiate trade deals, whether with the United States, with Australia, with Canada, and of course with the European Union itself. So it's going to take a long time before the UK has other trade deals in place where the issue would really arise. I actually think it could get stretched even longer, because both the Taoiseach Varadkar and Jean-Claude Juncker made the point that the transition agreement that was agreed today will last till at least December 2020, and it could last until December 2022. So that's one extension. Then the new arrangements would click in after that. So that is 4 years till 2026, when there would be a vote. And if it was voted down, there'd still be 2 years transition to further arrangements. So that could mean these arrangements are there till 2028.
We've just come out of a press conference where we heard the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, personally thank some of his staff members, is making it sound like really this time it's all over. And you said that Boris Johnson could get those necessary votes to pass the deal on Saturday. Mm-hmm. But what happens if he doesn't?
Well, if he doesn't, I think that there will be a huge pressure on him to demand an extension, to request an extension. The EU,
it's been voted by law.
Yeah, yes, but the law doesn't quite say that, because the law was originally if he didn't have a deal. He has a deal. He's taking it to Parliament. So if Parliament votes his deal down, then the question of whether the Ben law still applies and he's obliged to seek an extension, I think, could be open to dispute. But anyway, the thing is, the EU has made concessions, even in this changed agreement, to try and go the extra mile for the UK.
Such as?
Well, such as agreeing on some consent for the Northern Ireland Assembly, which wasn't in there before. Such as, to an extent, taking the British authorities on trust to collect customs duties for on behalf of the EU, so that goods destined for the Republic of Ireland can go through smoothly. Those are concessions, and there are people in the EU who are worried, who see this as an open door to customs fraud, who are worried that it will eventually erode, undermine the single market. They've been told, don't worry, the EU has now unanimously at leaders level approved this. The European Parliament still has to approve the new protocol as well.
All right, one final question for you. Paul Taylor, we mentioned at the outset how many EU summits you've been to. When we heard those EU leaders say they were sad to see the UK go, they really sounded genuine.
I think they are, because, Britain is a major power. It's a country that culturally is clearly fully part of Europe. It's a country that is part of this continent's history and that has made big contributions even to shaping the European Union. The single market as it is today wouldn't have been that way without the UK. European foreign policy. Britain has always been a difficult member, but, Europe will feel lighter without the weight of Britain as part of it. And I think they feel that also culturally. But obviously there's also a sense of it's about time this was finally over. About time it was finally over.
There was that question to Jean-Claude Juncker, the Commission President, the outgoing one, saying, what do you have to say to the 48% of
and he says
citizens?
He said they were right.
They said they were right. And that acrimony is not going to go away Saturday.
Of course it is. Look, it's an illusion to think that Brexit and any agreement will stop the British people tearing each other or tearing themselves apart over Europe. This will go on for decades. They have to negotiate a whole new relationship. It may turn out to be very unsatisfactory. Clearly, the British economy is going to suffer from this deal compared to Britain's position if it had stayed in the European Union. Once people have digested that, once people have had the experience of being outside the EU looking in, without all the benefits of membership, maybe over the course of a generation or less, they will think that maybe it was warmer inside, and they might apply again. But if they do come back, next time they will have to take the whole menu. It won't be à la carte.
It won't be à la carte. Paul Taylor, many thanks, columnist at Politico. It was about midday when news broke that there finally was an agreement between Boris Johnson and the EU 27. We scrambled over to the EU Parliament building and spoke with a longtime member of the European Parliament, Geoffrey Van Orden of the Conservative Party. Geoffrey Van Orden, thank you for speaking with us here on France 24. In the end, did Boris Johnson choose a deal with the European Union over agreeing with the DUP?
Not at all. I think both will happen. I've just been stopped by a European commissioner. He said to me, Boris has negotiated a brilliant deal. After all, the European Union said it wasn't possible to reopen the withdrawal agreement. They said it wasn't possible to remove the backstop. Both of those things have been done. There's a good deal on the table. Now let's get it through and get it passed.
The devil will be in the detail. Is it a backstop under a different guise?
Not at all. One enormous difference is the whole of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland will be outside the EU customs union. That means to say we can negotiate trade agreements with other countries, including Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, there will be some customs arrangements between Northern Ireland and the European Union, which will mean that we will have some checks in the Irish Sea. But can I just point out, people don't seem to understand, for decades there have been checks between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, for example, over the movement of cattle.
Right.
So this is just an extension of the sort of checks that have gone on in any case.
But some checks, you'll agree, is a vague term.
I agree it's a vague term, and we've got to work out exactly how that's going to be done. But it is very clear we're outside the EU customs union, all of us.
Jeffrey Van Orden, the big question now is, can it fly at Westminster? The DUP says it won't support this deal.
Well, the last I've actually heard from the DUP was that they were uncomfortable with it as it stood. Now, the hours are ticking away. I'm getting different messages about their particular position. They haven't said they'd oppose the deal. And there's a lot to play for here. So I very much hope the DUP will get on board. And I know within the DUP itself there are different views, and most of them would like to sign up to the deal.
You're saying that what is been negotiated could change between now and the time this summit breaks up Friday?
No, but I think maybe the UK government, they can make some arrangements with Northern Ireland that would help satisfy the DUP. That remains to be seen.
A bit of head counting, if you will. If the DUP either abstains or votes no, can Boris Johnson get votes elsewhere?
Well, he's going to get, he needs some votes from elsewhere. So the question is, all those in the House of Commons who've said, we oppose no deal. Well, we've got a deal. We've got a good deal. So are you going to be true to your word now and support the deal?
Wednesday, 2 Labour MPs submitted a motion whereby whatever comes back from Brussels will have to be put to the voters. You agree with that?
Well, I don't agree on the idea of a second referendum, because I think we had a referendum 3 years ago. The British people expressed their view. There were different views on that outcome, but the fact is the democratic decision was taken. It was the largest vote in our history, and there was a large majority in favour of leaving the European Union. However, I can see people trying to play games in the House of Commons. I can see some will try to get another referendum on the table. This is playing electoral games.
Jeffrey Van Orden, you've been a member of the European Parliament since 1999. At the time, there was even talk among some of the UK joining the Eurozone. Are you sorry that it's come to this?
Well, the talk of UK joining the Eurozone, I think, was mainly on the EU side rather than on the UK side. I don't think there are many people seriously contemplated that. Yes, I have been here a lot longer than I originally imagined I would be. This is my 5th mandate. A lot has changed in that time, and what we have seen is greater clarity of the direction of travel of the European Union in the direction of a single European state, which they've always said in the past they didn't want, but every movement now is certainly in that direction, which is yet another reason why, of course, the British people don't want to be part of this.
But are you sorry to be having to leave here?
I think, like everybody else, I want some certainty in my life, I want some surety, and I want to get on with the next stage.
Jeffrey Van Orden, many thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, we spoke to MEP Jeffrey Van Orden at the European Parliament. We're back at the Council, where, again, they're having a dinner after approving this deal with Boris Johnson, which he now has to sell to members of Parliament for the time being. The Unionist DUP party, which props up Boris Johnson's Conservatives in the Commons, has said it cannot approve the deal as it stands. But it's early days yet. And again, this issue of what to do about Northern Ireland, whose status has been, to a certain degree, frozen by the Good Friday agreements the Good Friday agreements, which ended the sectarian strife that had gone on for decades there. That's at the heart of the future agreement that's here. It's a report by Simon Harding.
It was considered as the elephant in the room when discussing Brexit, Northern Ireland and its pivotal role in negotiations. Both sides have found common ground on what Northern Ireland would look like in a post-Brexit future, Michel Barnier outlining 4 key elements for success. First, Northern Ireland will remain aligned to a limited set of EU rules specifically for goods. It will remain in the UK's custom territory, but still be an entry point into the EU single market. Both parties have agreed on VAT conditions satisfying UK concerns and the integrity of the EU single market. The fourth point, outlines that Northern Irish representatives will vote every 4 years on whether to continue applying union rules.
Prime Minister Johnson and the Taoiseach wanted to ensure long-term democratic support for the application by UK authorities of relevant union rules in Northern Ireland. 4 years after the entry into force of the protocol, the elected representatives of Northern Ireland will be able to decide by simple majority whether to continue applying relevant union rules in Northern Ireland or not.
On the final point, Michel Barnier said it was a cornerstone of the agreement because there would effectively be no more backstop and that it was sensible to agree on consent. Boris Johnson is hopeful that this deal will be accepted, but so far Northern Ireland's DUP had said the terms put forward are unacceptable, and without their support, the UK Prime Minister will struggle to get the pact approved.
And we're joined by Sinn Féin member of the European Parliament, Martina Anderson. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you, you're welcome.
So it was never going to be easy. What do you think of what's come out this time as opposed to the old divorce deal?
Well, there's no good Brexit, and the people of the north of Ireland did not give their democratic consent to be taken out of the EU, whether through a deal or no deal. That said, this deal at least avoids us crashing out of the EU, and it also avoids a border in Ireland, in the partition part of Ireland. It also, we're in a situation now where we have no unionist veto, which was a lot of people were concerned about that. And the third thing is that the backstop, the old backstop, which was temporary unless until some magical solution of technology was going to come along, this magic fairy was coming along to solve that problem. That is gone, and it's now semi-permanent. So there are concerns around the consent principle and how that will be applied.
Wait, explain to us what the consent principle is.
Well, in the Good Friday Agreement, the consent principle only applied to the constitutional question of whether people wanted to reunite Ireland or stay with Britain. So people have used a consent principle now to say that Stormont, which by the way is not sitting,
the Northern Ireland Assembly.
We don't have an assembly because of a denial of rights and denial of equality, and the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party, who were involved in allegation of corruption. So the assembly has collapsed. We haven't had an assembly now for over 1,000 days. But should the assembly get up and running, and we need an assembly, a power-sharing assembly, then they have given a consent to that assembly, which is messy and convoluted because it will be majority consent in the one hand of all of the elected representatives. In the other, they're saying parallel consent, which means the two majority parties agreeing. And if it's that way, then it'll continue for 8 years. If it's a majority, it will continue for 4 years. But what's going to happen immediately after the transfer, immediately after that period of time, this arrangement comes into force. It enters into force, and it is semi-permanent unless the Assembly decide otherwise.
And again, as you were saying, it's conditional on the people of Northern Ireland from both sides of the divide getting back together again at the Assembly.
Yeah.
So that's a good news story, right?
Well, that's what we need, is a credible Assembly to be functioning. People want good governance. They want democratic governance in place, that they don't have either any tradition discriminating against another. And as we stand here today, the Democratic Unionist Party is the problem for Britain, and they're the problem for us, because they are denying women their rights, they are denying LGBT their rights, they're denying Irish language speakers their rights, and many, many more. So there are rights based on
You don't agree with their policies.
But we have to share government with them.
Right.
But we will do it based on democratic principles of power sharing.
So at this point in time, they say they don't approve the deal as it stands. We heard earlier Geoffrey Van Orden, Conservative MEP, saying they don't say they're going to reject it. Is there, what's going on exactly? Could the position of the DUP change between now and then? Between now and Saturday?
I would be surprised if it changed. I think they've been quite clear throughout today that they would not vote for this deal.
But will they abstain? Will they vote against?
Well, I believe one of the reports that I seen said that they would vote against it. And I think the Democratic Unionist Party, we told them that the relationship that they had with the British government would end in tears. They were propping up the British government, doing it because they didn't have a majority, and we knew that wasn't going to end well.
But they're measuring their words, and so there's the sense, you get the sense that the DUP has stared over the cliff and decided they didn't like what they saw, and maybe without giving consent will at least let it pass.
Well, I would be surprised if that is the case with the DUP. I think the DUP know that there's a conversation taking place, a very reasonable, sensible conversation taking place based on the principle of consent in the Good Friday Agreement, where people are planning and preparing for constitutional change in Ireland. And it's about the role that the EU can play in facilitating Irish reunification in a very measured and planned way. And I think they are aware what Brexit has done is added an accelerant into that debate and that conversation. I think we are on a trajectory for constitutional change in Ireland, and as we have been acknowledging over the last number of weeks about the reunification of Germany, I think President Macron had said that the solution to the Brexit problem is Irish unity. And as we stand here today, I think that's the trajectory of travel for the people of Ireland.
All right, so you're saying it's as though this genie's been released from the bottle, right?
It's not going back in.
It's not going back in?
It's not going back in, regardless of whatever happens with this deal. Even if the House of Chaos, formerly known as the House of Commons, even if the House of Chaos...
But there are plenty of people in Northern Ireland who don't want entrenched positions on either side. They want everyone to get along.
Of course we want everybody to get along, but we have voted for a Good Friday Agreement that is lodged at the United Nations, and this Parliament, the European Parliament and the Council and the Commission has said it was going to uphold the Good Friday Agreement in all of its parts, and that means the provision, the democratically endorsed provision of the Agreement for Irish Unity. So people need to de-dramatise that conversation. This is about sharing an island together. This is about upholding the rights and entitlements of people who are British, and I will defend their right for British citizenship in a new Ireland context, as I would have hoped that they would defend my rights to Irish citizenship. But unfortunately the British court has just declared that all of us, they are telling us, in the north of Ireland are British despite the Good Friday Agreement and our Irish citizenship.
But you were saying at the outset you can live with the wording that they have right now, which is it's called a customs territory if you're British. It's called a customs union if you're in the EU, if you identify more with the Republic of Ireland.
Well, what I would say to you is there's no good Brexit.
Right.
Brexit is incompatible with the Good Friday Agreement. Brexit is an unmitigated disaster and will have profound implications whether there is a deal or whether there is a crash. But a crash-out Brexit is the worst Brexit, but Brexit will still damage us.
So what happens Saturday if Boris Johnson's deal gets voted down in the House of Commons?
Well, we've been here before. The European Union has been here not once, not twice, but on 3 occasions. He is mandated by law to ask for an extension. We will see if he was deliberately running down the clock to get to the point that there would be no deal. Some of us who know what the British establishment is like by way of negotiations warned the negotiators that they would run down the clock to the last minute. And I think that's what we're facing into on Saturday.
Martina Anderson, let's listen for a second to the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who was speaking just a short while ago here at the European Council.
I think this is a very good deal for every part of the UK and particularly for Northern Ireland. And I would point out that, as I say just now, from the beginning, Northern Ireland will be able to join with the rest of the UK in doing free trade deals around the world and all the other benefits that flow from membership of the UK market. And of course, without having any checks, any infrastructure of any kind at the border in Northern Ireland. And I think in that respect it is a great success.
Martina Anderson, what's your reaction to that?
Look, the British people voted to leave the EU. I respect that. I think that the British establishment are hankering after some kind of long-lost trade that they've had with the rest of the world. They want their empire back. I don't think they'll get it. But that said, I am hoping that the French people And the people of Britain and elsewhere respect that the Irish people voted to remain in the EU, and we did not consent to Brexit.
One final question for you. The Scottish also want their independence. They have nationalists who sit at Westminster. Just between you and me, we don't have to tell anybody else. Are there days when you wish Sinn Féin's MPs sat in the House of Commons for a vote like the one that's coming up Saturday?
Not one. No, nay, never. We will never go into that house of chaos. And we're looking at a dysfunctional society. We want out of it. We want our pathway to be into a decent, good, better future. And I think that's what the constitutional change in Ireland and the conversations will lead us to.
Martina Anderson, member of the European Parliament for Sinn Féin, so many thanks for speaking with us. If you're just joining us here on France 24, it's been a momentous day with a Brexit breakthrough and an agreement Boris Johnson now has to sell Saturday to the House of Commons. Let's listen to some of the reactions earlier from some of the key players.
I gave a brief doorstep with Boris Johnson at the Parliament half an hour ago, and I was ruling out that there will be any kind of prolongation. If we have a deal, we have a deal, and there is no need for prolongation. That's not only the British view, that's my view too.
Parliaments can be unhappy with the deal. I want to believe that Prime Minister Johnson will have a majority to back this pact.
We've shown that the 27 are sticking together, and we're examining it now in Germany. But I'm very optimistic.
On one side, I'm relieved that we seem to have a deal. This is important. On the other hand, I'm sad that our British friends will leave the European Union. But to have an orderly Brexit is of utmost importance for people, for the economy, but also as a starting point for our future relation.
Just to give you an idea of how much people have been on tender hooks this Thursday, when there's the announcement around lunchtime of an agreement, sterling soars on world currency markets, goes up against the dollar, but then as investors and pundits start to count heads at Westminster, well, the UK currency starts to go back down. Now, for more, we're joined at this point by Philippe Lamberts, Belgian member of the European Parliament, head of the co-chair of the Greens in the European Parliament. Thank you so much for joining us here on France 24.
My pleasure.
Are those investors right to curb their enthusiasm?
I think so, because don't forget that we've been here before. A few months ago, we struck a deal between the EU27 and the British Prime Minister, called Theresa May at that time, and she had at least a nominal majority in the House of Commons. Now we're again striking a deal with a British Prime Minister, but one that does not even have a working majority in the Parliament. So the challenge is even steeper for Boris Johnson than it ever was for Theresa May. And you know, the deal is not that different. You have basically a Northern Ireland limited backstop instead of having an all-UK backstop, but you still have that kind of constraints.
It's not a minor detail.
No, it's not a minor detail, but that means that at least part of the United Kingdom will need to remain aligned for the foreseeable future with the European Union. That's just fact of life.
It's a different UK, though, under Boris Johnson than it was under Theresa May.
Is it? We have the same parliament, if I'm not mistaken. And he has lost 21 Tory MPs whom he sacked brutally a few weeks ago. So actually, yeah, the situation has a bit changed, but not in favor of the British Prime Minister.
We heard the Prime Minister equivocating a little bit about how he's going to get those 21 that he sacked back into the fold.
But even if he does, that's still not enough. Don't forget about this. I mean, even if he gets DUP across the line, even if he gets all 21 rebels back, and some of them told me that they will not vote for the deal, this is still not a majority. So he would still need to convince opposition MPs to support him. And just weeks after having shut down Parliament, insulted Parliament, humiliated Parliament, I don't know how they feel, but you know, when you ruffle the feathers of a Parliament, and we saw that in the European Union with Emmanuel Macron, well, there's a backlash coming. And I expect that kind of thing to happen in Westminster as well. So, to me, I wouldn't bet too much on this deal being passed on Saturday in the House of Commons.
Earlier, the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, was asked, well, would you be agreeing to an extension? He played coy, said, look, I'll put it to the member states. He didn't.
He's right to do. He's right to do so. I think this is the correct attitude. He should not preempt a request that has not been made. Neither should he close the door. So if I had been Donald Tusk, I would have reacted exactly the same way, and that is not the way Jean-Claude Juncker reacted earlier. But anyway, it's not Jean-Claude Juncker's decision. It is primarily in the hands of the heads of states and government under the leadership of Donald Tusk.
So it's not over Saturday, the way you're describing it, yet everyone says they're tired of talking about only Brexit all the time.
Yeah, we're not doing that. I mean, the Parliament is working. We are not talking about Brexit all the time. Look, we have been hearing the candidate commissioners, and Brexit or no Brexit, we were doing our job. So yes, there is Brexit fatigue, but we should not let our emotions take over. This is about a rational choice, about the future of the European Union, the future of the United Kingdom. Let's keep a cool head, and the game is not over until it's over.
The game's not over till it's over. We saw on Wednesday the announcement that the new Commission, the one that was due to take over November the 1st, has been pushed back by a month. That's because the Parliament rejected 3 of the nominees, including the one of France. That delay, is it good or bad news for Brexit negotiations?
I don't think it makes a difference, because the Parliament is still the Parliament, so the majorities in the Parliament are still the same. And I think that on Brexit we can count on a solid 5-group support for a deal if it is ratified by...
But the fact that there was a deadline was helping to concentrate the minds.
No, but we are concentrated. It's not all minds that lack concentration. I mean, if the House of Commons passes the deal, then of course there will be a majority in the European Parliament to support it. So there's no doubt about that. But then again, if a different avenue is chosen, namely a second referendum, we should be remiss not to let it happen.
Philippe Lamberts, if you're proved wrong, if the deal is approved on Saturday by Westminster, what happens then for Europe? What will Europe look like without the UK?
Well, weaker, obviously. This is, as Michel Barnier clearly said, this is a lose-lose game. This is a game where the UK loses influence and we lose influence, because united we're stronger. That's simply as that. And the Taoiseach said as much as well. So we are all convinced that this is a lose-lose game. We didn't choose this. We honestly negotiated. If the British people want to reconsider now or in the future, the door remains open.
The door remains open. We heard Leo Varadkar, the Irish Prime Minister, saluting the fact that in this negotiation, the rest of the 27 have stood by Ireland, which is a small nation in terms of population, and that it shows that this is one large organization where small nations matter. As a Belgian?
Absolutely. I totally resonate with the words of the Taoiseach. This is, again, proof that united, we are strong. So even if you're from a small country, l'union fait la force, as we say in French, and that's the motto of Belgium, by the way. Well, this is basically, if you want to carry any weight in the world, we need to stand united. Don't forget that even including the United Kingdom, Europeans, the citizens of the European Union represent 7% of the global population. United Kingdom alone, less than 1%. I mean, you cannot have influence when you're so small.
And will it be a Franco-German club even more without the UK?
I hope not. And this is why I absolutely want to keep the UK in, because I like balance. And, you know, my country was created at the behest of the United Kingdom as a buffer state between France and Germany long time ago, but I still see the value of the British contribution to European affairs. They have to stay.
All right. We have Philippe Lamberts, who thinks they're not out until they're out. Many thanks for being with us. Philippe Lamberts, member of the European Parliament, co-chair of the Greens in the European Parliament. Now, at this point, I want to call in, if she's here, Catherine Nicholson. Catherine Nicholson, come on over. And she's gonna go around. Thank you, Philippe. Our European Affairs editor, who joins us at this point in time. Now, there are all-nighters. The good news, Catherine, is that because we had the white smoke, if you will, come around lunchtime, it looks like you're going to be able to get some sleep this Thursday.
Yes, some sleep. Yeah, exactly. We had been thinking we might be waiting quite a long time for the Brexit decision. But don't forget, as Philippe Lamberts just said, there are other things happening in the European Union as well. There are some really, really big dossiers that are meant to be considered here, namely the situation in northern Syria with the Turkish incursion and how the EU wants to respond to that. It's really not clear what they want to do. And also there's the issue of European enlargement as well. Northern Macedonia and Albania, they were both supposed to be starting accession to the European Union. That's gone over a deadline. There's a lot of talk about France being very, very strict and stern on blocking that. So there's going to be some really big discussions about the possibility of heating that up again and giving a bit of a perspective to Northern Macedonia and Albania.
All right, we heard jokes from Boris Johnson earlier about not wanting to talk about whipping in this illustrious setting. Whipping is that you try to get all the members of parliament from your bloc to vote as one, otherwise you lean on them a little bit. In some cases, recently, he expelled some.
Well, threaten them
from
outright,
the party.
yeah.
You enforce discipline. We're not going to talk about how he does at Westminster. How do you feel on the back of this summit, how he's doing here in this setting at the European Council?
It's interesting, isn't it? This is, let's remember, Boris Johnson's first and he's hoping last European summit, because obviously he's hoping that the UK is going to be out of the EU at the end of this month. I'm getting a sense of that the European leaders are taking very much the same line with Boris Johnson that they took with Theresa May. This sense that they want to be seen as being respectful to the United Kingdom, showing willing in terms of the Brexit negotiations. We're hearing actually a lot of the same language that we heard from those leaders when they were talking about Theresa May, talk about we respect Mrs. May, well, we respect Mr. Johnson this time around, talking about wanting to keep friendly relations, how the UK is close geographically, all of those sorts of things. So I think, on the European side, they're extremely aware of how the European Union is reported in the British media and avoiding a blame game.
And hardened cynics have argued going into the summit that any agreement that comes out, it's because nobody wants to be the one to take the blame. But do you feel as though there really is a breakthrough?
I mean, it certainly is a breakthrough because, let's face it, a couple of weeks ago, we really didn't have any perspective on a deal at all. It was really unclear where the wiggle room was going to come. The European Union really was never going to compromise on the single market and start allowing any old kind of goods in, making any kind of changes on that. The European Union, I did personally believe all along, really was committed to the idea of having no hard border on the island of Ireland. That actually came into these negotiations a very, very long time ago, back in December 2017, in fact. It's certainly moved along, and the European Union has made it very, very clear as well that the ball is now in the UK's court. It's in the court of the House of Commons. I think Donald Tusk literally said those words. The ball is now in the UK's court. Like you said, there's blame game and breakthrough at the same time.
And I have to ask you, have you taken your vitamins? Because once a divorce deal is through, if a divorce deal goes through, then a whole new negotiation begins over trade.
Absolutely. There's a lot of talk, isn't there, of let's get this thing done, let's get Brexit done, as if there is going to be some kind of end point and we're all going to stop talking about this on November the 1st. I actually overheard one of the, I think it was an Austrian official who works for the European Council, saying to Austrian journalists, now is when it really begins. So this, it's only just begun. Like you say, Boris Johnson keeps saying he wants to negotiate an ambitious free trade deal with the European Union. Well, let's not forget how long those things take to negotiate. There's the Mercosur deal that's still not signed off. It's been 20 years in the making. That's with South American countries. I think probably the quickest one was with Canada, and that took 7 years to negotiate. So yeah, I'm going to take a lot of vitamins and probably back up quite a lot of coffee as well.
All right, and this was supposed to be a kind of a clean break for everyone at this summit because you have an outgoing commission after European elections in the spring and an outgoing European Council president. Let's listen to what Donald Tusk had to say earlier.
Now the ball is in the court of the UK. I have no idea what will be the result of the debate in House of Commons on Saturday. It's not for me to comment on political developments in the UK. But if there is a request for an extension, I will consult member states to see how to react.
It's perhaps an overused colloquialism, but yes, the ball is in the UK's court now.
I mean, it quite literally is. I mean, the EU, very strict on process, and that's back where we are. So the European Union's remaining 27 member states, their heads of state and government, have unanimously agreed that they're OK for this deal to go ahead. The next step is, is the UK Parliament all right with this? If the UK says yes, then the EU can take its next step. But the European Parliament, which also has to ratify this, as we heard from Philippe Lamberts, it's not going to be looking into that until they know whether the UK Parliament has done that. So the EU is saying, this is the end of the story for us for now. But if the UK Parliament does ratify this deal on Saturday, then things are going to move very, very quickly. I was speaking to an official here from the Council who said that the Parliament is likely to try and get this onto their agenda as quickly as this week. So the Parliament's going to be sitting down in Strasbourg. So MEPs, if the UK members of Parliament do ratify it on their side, then the MEPs are not going to have a great deal of time to go through all of those pages of this deal, revise, or perhaps read for the first time, and decide if they want to back it. I mean, obviously, as Philippe Lambert said, if the UK agrees that they want it to go ahead, then there's likely to be a block vote, and there really shouldn't be an issue with the European Parliament. But yeah, we're now into procedure, and it is
we're into
up to
procedure
the UK
on
to move
this side.
on.
We're probably into a lot of acrimony between now and Saturday on the UK side, and then a general election, and then a new commission over here. We already have a new European Parliament head. It's going to be different actors at the table.
Yes, that's quite right. It was interesting, wasn't it, seeing Jean-Claude Juncker, for example, Donald Tusk standing there giving those press conferences. But they're going to be out of their jobs within a matter of weeks. They're at the end of their mandate. So we've got Ursula von der Leyen coming in. But, she's really been singing from the same hymn sheet as Jean-Claude Juncker up to now. I can't see that she's going to take any kind of a different stance towards the UK. Let's face it, she's a German. She's from the biggest member state by population, economically, a country that's a massive exporter. This is a country that is going to want to keep good relations with the United Kingdom as much as anybody else.
One final question for you. Catherine Nicholson, Europe editor for France 24. We've had the Greek crisis. We've had the refugee crisis. We have had the financial crisis more broadly. We have the battle, if you will, between populists and federalists within Europe. When you look back at this summit, how seminal a moment could it be?
Well, it does feel like if this deal gets ratified by the House of Commons, then yes, this unanimous agreement from the EU27, it is going down in history books, isn't it? It's President Macron talking about he wants to start looking to the future. He's got big plans for the European Union, really wants some big changes. So I think there's a lot of hope that this is going to be a big seminal moment and a turning point for the EU.
All right, I heard an if in there. We'll see what happens. Catherine Nicholson, many thanks. We want to thank you for joining us here. Our coverage of Brexit and of European affairs continues here on France 24.